So the virgin birth, there is this idea that if somebody is born from a virgin, that they are special, set apart. And this idea permeates our culture even today. If we look at a lot of even modern media or movies, you got Anakin Skywalker, aka Darth Vader, who is conceived by the Force. You have Paul Atreides in Dune, or Neo from the Matrix. And this is nothing new either. I mean, everything from Hercules to King Arthur, to even back to the ancient god kings, like in Egypt and other ancient civilizations, would claim that their rulers were born of a virgin. It's a symbol of divine authority. It's a sign that we're dealing with somebody here who's more than just a mere mortal. And all this has led to some speculation that Christianity has, over time, worked into it this idea of a virgin birth into the Jesus narrative. And then if you look at the original language, it didn't actually state that Jesus would be born of a virgin. The argument is that this was something that was kind of tacked on after the fact. So was Mary really a virgin? How would we know? Is it possible that there was no immaculate conception? And what does the Bible have to say? Let's take a look.
Attention, bargain shoppers.
So Matthew introduces Mary as somebody who is pledged to be married to Joseph. But we're told she is found to be with child through the Holy Spirit before they came together. We see in Matthew 1:24 through 25. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until after she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. So the gospel writers are explicit in stating that Jesus was born from a Virgin Mary. His birth was miraculous. And the claim that Mary was a virgin at the time of giving birth to Jesus is one of the most defining doctrines in Christian theology. It's part of the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, which proclaim the core tenets of the Christian faith. But some debate has arisen over this claim. First, because of mythological parallels. For example, critics argue that a virgin birth is a Christian adaptation of pagan myths. But also they argue because some of the early language used may not have necessarily implied that. If we look at Isaiah 7:14, which is the prophecy that this comes from, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel." Now the original Hebrew word here used is alma, and this means a young woman who is of marrying age, but not necessarily a virgin. But when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek in the Septuagint around 2nd century BC, Alma was translated as Parthenos, which unambiguously means virgin. And the Greek rendering of the gospel story influenced a lot of the early church, including potentially Matthew's interpretation of the Isaiah prophecy. So I'll point out that this does not mean that Isaiah's words do not mean virgin birth. It's just not explicitly referring to a virgin birth. And additionally, the virgin birth claim is not unique to Christianity. In Greco-Roman and Near Eastern contexts, miraculous birth narratives were often used whenever talking about a significant figure or a country's leader. Like as was stated in the opening of this video, is not a new concept or something that's unique to Christianity. So that's what kind of fuels the idea that this possibly might not be true. And this idea that history has sort of grafted this mythos onto Jesus after the fact. However, there are some other things to consider which might point to this being true. First, the first century Jewish culture had a strong honor-shame dynamic in their culture. If we look at the Old Testament specifically, in the Mosaic Law, there are stipulations regarding the stoning of women who have given birth without being married. Deuteronomy 22:20-21 says, "If, however, the charge is true and no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house, and there the men of her town shall stone her to death. She has done an outrageous thing in Israel by being promiscuous while still in her father's house. You must purge the evil from among you." So claiming to be a virgin when you're pregnant, prior to being married, would have been a very precarious position to be in. It's also worth noting that Mary was not always a virgin. Some people have this idea in their minds of Mary being this pure woman who's never had sex. But Jesus did have a number of brothers and sisters. It's also true that many pagan cultures have a virgin birth narrative, but the Jews specifically did not follow pagan traditions. Their whole thing was being set apart for God, not going along with pagan cultures. So it would have been unusual for them to adopt this one tradition into their culture. And so if we look at the gospel tradition, specifically in Matthew and in Luke, their narratives were composed from different communities within the Jewish faith, different sects with different beliefs, possibly even from different geographical regions such as Greece and Syria, and inspired by different source materials. And yet both of them come to this conclusion of a virgin birth, which means that this is likely something that has been part of the Jewish culture and history for a long time, that they've been expecting this. So that would kind of contradict the claim that Matthew is just going along with the Greek culture of the divinely inspired birth. Additionally, if this were just a pagan parallel, there are many other aspects of pagan culture and around the virgin birth narrative that aren't paralleled. So in a very zoomed out bird's eye view, yes, there are some similarities, but when you get down to it, it's very unique. And the virgin birth also functions within our theological framework, which means there are things we can learn from it. First, it affirms that Jesus is both fully man and fully God. And this fulfills John 1:14, which reads, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." It also teaches divine initiative, that salvation is brought forth not from human will or effort, but from God's sovereign action. It also reveals Christ's holiness to us. It parallels Christ with Adam. Adam, if you remember from the Garden of Eden, didn't have parents either. He was born directly from God's creation. And there are a lot of parallels between Christ and Adam. But whereas Adam failed in sin and doomed humanity, Christ prevailed over sin and his humanity's salvation. So at the end of the day, you have different gospel traditions all saying the same thing. You have unanimous Christian traditions and early church fathers saying this was a virgin birth. And you have the fact that it aligns with God's character and what he teaches us about himself and about his truth and our salvation. So I'd say this is all strong theological evidence for a virgin birth. But I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Do you have any questions about this? Was this even something you ever thought about before? Also, please feel free to like and subscribe. It does help out the channel. I'll leave the verses used today in the description. My name is Adam. This is Bargain Bin Theology. And remember, you get what you pay for.